Thank you, Sherry Williams. Well, as Sherry said, it's that time of year. It's that time of year where I get to dig out my story about Jimmy, the little Catholic boy who wanted a bicycle for Christmas. So Jimmy goes to his mom and lets her know that he wants a bicycle for Christmas. And maybe Santa could bring that to him this year. And the mother reminds Jimmy, you know, Jimmy, this holiday is really about baby Jesus' birthday. So maybe if you wrote a letter to baby Jesus and told him how you're going to be a good boy next year, he might talk to Santa and make sure you get that bicycle. So Jimmy thinks this makes sense. So he goes up to his room and he writes a letter to baby Jesus. Dear baby Jesus, if you bring me a bicycle for Christmas, or tell Santa to, I'll not tell any lies all year. He then puts it in an envelope, addresses it to baby Jesus. Bethlehem is walking down to the post office to drop it off when he suddenly thinks, wait a minute, I can't not tell lies all year. Baby Jesus is going to know that. What am I going to do? So he goes back to his room and he starts again. Dear baby Jesus, if you tell Santa to bring me a bicycle for Christmas, I'll be nice to my little sister all year. Again, he's walking down to the post office to drop off the letter. He realizes there's absolutely no way I'm going to be able to be nice to my little sister all year. What am I going to do? He's just absolutely distraught. So on the way home, he sees his Catholic church, and being desperate, he decides to go in and pray for inspiration. He kneels down, looks up, and there he sees a statue of the Virgin Mary. And then it hits him. That's it. He runs up, he grabs the statue, he runs home, he puts the statue under his bed, he gets back to the desk and he writes, Dear Jesus, if you ever want to see your mother again, I know, we get a little off track sometimes. Which is why I'm here today to invite us to take it to heart. Now, I know just a few weeks ago, Dr. Marc was up here reviewing the 4 agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz with us, and one of those agreements is not to take things personally, right? And I know when we hear about taking things to heart, sometimes it has that connotation of taking things personally. You know, the definition I saw of taking it to heart is to internalize, to be very much affected by something or what someone said or something out there in the world. And that certainly, to me, sounds like taking it personally. But I'm here to look at a whole other version of what taking it to heart really, really means. You know, the heart is the organ that we associate with love, right? When we want to represent love, we draw a heart. And actually, as we'll see in a moment, science actually agrees with that idea. And what we would say in Science of Mind is that God's unconditional love resides at the center of everything and everyone, including us. So the heart is that part of us that can see things from that point of view of unconditional love, which can never be hurt, which can never be injured, which would not take things personally. There's a capacity in us to see things from that highest vibration of love. There's a greater love intelligence in us than we often realize. And our spiritual journey, our spiritual evolution is about awakening to that truth and realizing that vibration of unconditional love that is our true nature. Now, some time ago, we showed a movie in here called The Power of the Heart. We carried the book and the DVD in our bookstore. And in this film, a study was presented that they say has been repeated many times with the same result, where they hooked people up to electrodes. They had electrodes on their brain, in the heart area, other parts of their physiology, so that they wanted to see how the body responds to stimuli. And what they told these people to do was to push a button. And when they pushed that button, there was a computer that would randomly generate a slide that they would see. And the slide sometimes would have an image that was really pleasing, beautiful, sweet, and other times it was something very frightening or very disturbing. And what they found is that the heart responded to the image before the brain. Both the brain and heart responded in consistent ways. Like if it was a negative image, they would respond one way. If it was positive, they'd respond a different way, and those patterns were consistent. But the heart preceded the brain. More interestingly, the heart responded before the person pushed the button, showing that there is an intelligence that transcends time, that is much greater than we're aware of, that lies within us. And the movie goes on to show that that seat of intelligence is also a seat that is oriented toward pure love, toward goodness for all at the expense of none. The heart is that part of us that is able to look beyond appearances. You know, what do we say all the time? Judge not by appearance. The heart, love, the nature of love, knows the unity of all life, the nature of God's love in us, knows that that nature lies in all, even if it's not expressed, and that's way beyond personality. So that's why taking it to heart is very different from taking things personally. Taking things personally comes from a me versus you, me versus the world, and how this affects me, where in the heart, love would recognize our human shortcomings, the shortcomings of others, as something that is simply based on us not fully realizing who we are as expressions of God, that we have not yet awakened to that God nature that lives in all of us. It would not condemn. You know, even at our worst, even when we show up at our worst, even when we see those most heinous behaviors that we witness, we know that there is a capacity in ourselves and others to be different. We may be very unloving in this moment, but there's a capacity in us to call forth love. You know, if we think of the ideal parent, you know, parents struggle with this all the time, in that they see their children misbehaving. They understand that the misbehavior is due to them wanting to feel good and be happy and all of that, but they try to figure out a way to get their children to understand, wait, there's a better way to go about this. There's a potential in you to have the experience you want without making it at someone else's expense or doing something that's damaging in some way. Right? Parents, isn't this something you've had to look to do throughout your lives with your kids? You know, if we were to look at little Jimmy, we can understand that we all get, you know, lose sight of things, and suddenly getting that bicycle becomes the biggest, most important thing. Ideally, we would want to be the presence that says, Jimmy, Jimmy, you're forgetting who you are. Your life is not dependent on getting a bicycle, and there are better ways to go about this, right? It's all about trying to get Jimmy to awaken to that greater potential within himself. Well, that capacity to see that potential that's greater than any of the behaviors, any of the conditions that we're witnessing in the world, that capacity lies within each and every one of us. You may have, at some point along the journey, engaged in meditation practices where very often we're asked in meditation to breathe in love, breathe in peace, breathe in serenity. hold it there for a moment, and then breathe out stress or anger or whatever negative feelings we're carrying. Well, I found an opposite technique, which is not as often used, but I find highly effective, to be particularly effective for me, and that is to actually breathe the anger, breathe the hate, breathe that negative feeling, the anxiety, into the heart space. From there, feel that vibration of love and light that can transform anything negative into something good. And then feel it create a sense of peace, of joy, of whatever it is we're feeling disconnected from, and breathe that out. It reminds us that there's something in us that can make good of anything that we're experiencing. You know, if you look at it literally, this is what our hearts are doing all the time. The heart takes in depleted cells that are depleted of oxygen, passes them on to the lungs to be oxygenated, pulls them back in, and pumps them out to the body temple. Now, I see that, when we're thinking of this, it's like we're supposed to see whatever, take it in, and just love it. Just go, oh, that's okay. I get it, but, serial killing, how bad can it be? It'll make a great episode of Criminal Minds. No, we're not asked to not acknowledge the things that are inappropriate in the world. The heart does not take depleted cells and go, oh, no big deal. Let's just pass you back out. We would die if that were the case. We can acknowledge where something is not showing up at its highest vibration of love or goodness. But what we need to remember is that there's a greater presence in us that can absolutely make good of the situation. It could be, I take it in, metaphysically, the heart would bring in whatever that thing that is negative and say, okay, but there's a greater good to this than can be realized, would bring light and love to it. And knowing that greater truth would try to put out more of that peace or that joy or whatever that is missing, that is not being fully expressed in that situation. And, it's also not about, the heart does not, as Martin Luther King encouraged us, does not fight hate with hate. Okay, that is not the answer. Although it's very compelling, it's not the answer. The heart does not draw in depleted cells and go, oh, you're going to give me that? Seriously? Oh, let me show you this. Let me add a little poison. Spit that out. Take that. That would not produce a healthy experience for any of us. Taking it to heart would mean that we acknowledge the shortcomings of ourselves, the shortcomings of others, and realize it's based on a feeling of being separate from God, a false sense of being separate from God, but that there is that presence of God in us, in those individuals, that can be called forth. And when we bring the awareness more to the potential of God that is to be realized in this situation, then we create the avenues in consciousness for more love to be revealed. And, I know it can take time. We don't necessarily see something that is very disturbing, whether it's in our own personal lives or in the world, and just go to, oh, let me just lift it to love. And part of this process, taking it to heart, is to have compassion for ourselves. To realize it is very hard for me to call forth forgiveness or to see this in a higher way right now. I am so disturbed by it, but to have compassion and to say, but I know there's something in me that's greater than what I'm feeling. And I know we work a lot with the praising and raising prayer, right? Where when we see people whose behaviors we object to, we praise them and raise them in the name of love. I found it very helpful when I'm having trouble with that, is to praise myself and raise myself. So I praise myself, I raise myself in the name of love, because I know there's a part of me that's bigger than the part of me that does not want to give up resenting this person. And as I do that, now I can praise and raise this person or this group in the name of love. As we take things to heart and look from the eyes of unconditional love to perceive that greater potential in ourselves and in others, then we're guided to constructive ways to move forward and bring more love into the world. As I was reflecting on this, I was reminded of the situation back in 1993 in Billings, Montana, where a Jewish family was the victim of a hate crime. It was at Hanukkah time, and they had placed a menorah in their 5-year-old son's window, which looked out onto the street. And someone that was part of a group that thinks in terms of us versus you, who's not very developed in consciousness, threw a brick through that window. And word got out about the incident, and a woman who was the executive director of the Montana Association of Churches immediately contacted her pastor, who was part of the Congregational United Church of Christ, who immediately called other ministers. And the idea was what they were going to do is encourage their congregants to all put menorahs in their windows. The Billings Gazette published the article and devoted a whole page in their newspaper to a picture of a menorah, asking people to please post it in their windows. And before you knew it, there were tens of thousands of menorahs hanging in the windows. That is an example of the inspiration of love, where we see something that is unloving and say, how do we lift this to love? How many souls were healed of a sense of me versus you based on religious differences and got to experience that greater sense of oneness based on taking it to heart and bringing love to the situation. And it all comes from remembering the greater potential of God in those people, in the situation, that there's some greater good to be revealed. I know, not easy all the time. And my friend Reverend Bonnie up in Ventura was sharing with me a few weeks ago, her board president, Becky, wrote a letter to a nurse who had taken care of her mother in the hospital, and she just profusely thanked this nurse. She said there were so many things that she had done that were so beneficial to her mother. And a few days later, the nurse had that letter in her bag, and she was in a fast food place ordering something, and she put the bag down. And when it came time to pay, she looked down and suddenly realized her bag was gone. Someone had stolen it. She was so upset. Everything was there, her cell phone, her keys, all her credit cards, money, you name it. And so a lot of people came together to get her home, get her back into her home and everything. But she was so distraught and felt so violated and so angry that someone would do that, right? I think we can all understand. The next day, she opened her door and her bag was sitting right next to the door with a letter, a note taped to it from the person who had taken it saying, I opened your bag and I saw that letter from Becky and I felt so horrible that I was going to do something like this to you. You're obviously a good person and I'm so ashamed that I did this. The capacity for that to happen, the way that that happens is when we remember there's a part of us that's bigger than our wrongdoings. That's what we want to keep remembering, right? What we focus on increases. Do we want to focus on the wrongdoing, or do we want to focus on the potential to make right of it? And I just want to share, I know I've shared this before, but probably my most powerful experience of this, of taking something to heart, was when I had someone make an appointment with me that came in very angry, really wanting to challenge this concept of God is in everything and everyone. and then started proceeding to let me know that he had just recently been released from prison, and it was due to behaviors of misconduct with children, which immediately triggered all these thoughts in me of, oh my God, does he know I'm a mandated reporter? What is he going to tell me? How am I going to respond to this? That would be taking it personally. It's all about me and how I'm feeling in this moment. But as he continued to tell his story, and he looked at me and said, I'm doing what I have to do. I'm going to see my therapist like I'm supposed to. But I still have these feelings. And he started to weep, just absolutely sob and say, how can you say God is in me? And that's when something happened here in the heart, because I did not intellectually know how to deal with this, but something opened up and the words came out. Why are you identifying with that part of you that might do something harmful to children versus the part of you that so desperately wants to transcend that? Why are you saying this is you instead of this? And it was hearing that I later heard from him that told him, no matter how much I have to struggle with, there's something bigger in me, and I will never harm someone like that again, ever. That's the work we want to do. You know, that's that part of us that is sitting there going, this doesn't look like God right now, but God is there, and I will do whatever I have to allow that greater good to be known and revealed. So going back to our little story about Jimmy, who got off track, obviously, and lost his sense of oneness with God. In this season where we've got Hanukkah coming up, first night falls on the same night as Christmas Eve, which has this theme of discovering that sanctuary with the eternal light that lives in all of us, that flame that can never be extinguished, the light of God. With this Christmas season, which it has this theme of birthing more of God's nature into the world so that we can bring forth more peace on earth and goodwill to men. I think I would rather not shut my heart down, not condemn that Jimmy in me. Yes, I can forget quite often. I don't want to shut my heart down to that Jimmy in me or the Jimmy in others. I would rather be the consciousness that says, hey, that's not who you really are. Let's step back. Let's look how we can make good of this. God's love is here. We can call it forth. Would you join me in that intention? Yes. Thank you. Thank you that I say that we take this to heart by taking it to prayer. Let us pray. So joining together, feeling that oneness of all life, feeling that presence of God that is love, that is light, that is a goodness beyond what we can conceive, but that is that life and love that propels everything into creation, that lives in all creation, that lives at the center of each and every one of us. Each of us here is an expression of God's life, and all the attributes we associate with God are the truth of who and what we really are. And so I know that as we come together today with this intention to look at ourselves, to look at the world with that greater perspective of love, to take things to heart and to praise and raise that presence of God that lives in us, that lives in all things, and thereby more fully experience the goodness of God, more fully support its revelation in the world. I know that we are all blessed. We are blessed in coming together as a community. And I let this prayer be a prayer for our loved ones, for situations in the world that call to our attention. And if any of us right now are feeling depleted or feeling empty when we came in today, I ask you to just open up to all the love in this room and be filled up. And those of us who feel that presence within us, let's just extend it outward to anyone that needs to know it for themselves. We bless our church. We bless all churches everywhere, synagogues, temples, mosques, ashrams, all paths to God. And with a full and grateful heart, I just release this word knowing it is so, I let it be, and so it is. And together we say, Amen.